Hey guys, and welcome to day 31 of Lent. Today we're looking at Jesus cleanses the temple. And we're looking at this through Luke chapter 19 verses 41 to 48. When Jesus came near and saw the city, he wept over it. If only you'd known, he said, on this day, even you, what peace meant, but now it's hidden and you can't see it. Yes, the days are coming upon you when your enemies will build up earthworks all around you and encircle you and squeeze you in every direction. They will bring you crashing to the ground, you and your children within you. They won't leave one single stone on another, because you didn't know the moment when God was visiting you. He went into the temple and began to throw out the traders. It's written, he said, my house shall become a house of prayer, but you've made it a brigand's cave. He was teaching every day in the temple, but the chief priests, the scribes, and the leading men of the people were trying to destroy him. They couldn't find any way to do it, because all the people were hanging on his every word. At last it is Jesus' turn to cry. Earlier in the Gospel of Luke we find other people in tears and others in distress coming to him for healing and new life. But Jesus is not immune to tears. In John's Gospel, Jesus weeps at the tomb of his friend Lazarus. Now here he weeps over the city, and there is no one to console him. Jesus' tears are at the core of the Christian gospel. This was not a moment of regrettable weakness, something a real Messiah ought to have avoided. Again and again during his long journey he had warned of God's impending judgment on the city and temple, because they, like the town of Galilee, had resisted his call for peace for the gospel of God's grace, which would reach out in love to the Gentile world. Unless you repent, he said, you will all likewise perish. Now here he was face to face with the city where Pilate had killed Galileans and would shortly kill one more. Face to face with the city where the Tower of Siloam had fallen, and where, before too long, towers and walls and the temple itself would come crashing down. It is an essential part of Jesus' message of warning and judgment that it is uttered, finally, through sobs and tears. Luke's writing of the scene is vivid, conveying the sense of Jesus sobbing out a few phrases, until he finally controls himself sufficiently to utter the solemn warning upon the city that has chosen to ignore the moment when God was coming in solemn visitation. There is no sense of I told you so or it serves you right, only the shaking sobs of the prophets like Jeremiah. The terrible judgment that has been pronounced and will shortly be executed proceeds not from a stern and cold justice, but from a heart of love that wants the best for and from the people, and so must now oppose with sorrow and tears the rebellion that has set its own interests and agendas before those of the God who established them there in the first place. The tears and the temple action then go together. Jesus is not simply mounting the angry protest about the commercialization of temple business. His action is a solemn prophetic warning, echoing those of Jeremiah and others, that if the temple becomes a hideout for brigands, literally or metaphorically, it will come under God's judgment. Now, it appears the brigands are indeed running the show. Jesus is not so much concerned with the traders. They, to be sure, are doubtless making a few extra shekels on the side, but that's trivial compared with what the high priest and their entourage have been doing. The temple had become the focal point of the national ideology. As in Isaiah's day, it stood in the public imagination for the unshakable promise of Israel, God to keep Israel safe, come what may. And as in Isaiah's day, Israel had to face the challenge that unless the promise was met with faith and obedience, it would count for nothing, and indeed worse than nothing. It would turn into a curse. If you're in a covenant with the Holy God, disobedience doesn't simply prevent blessings, bringing you back, as it were, to square one. It calls down the judgment that a sorrowful God will pour out on his people when they reject him and his purposes. Not surprisingly, the message was unpopular with the ruling group, clerical and lay Jesus' action in the temple was the immediate cause of his arrest. But behind what he did and how the rulers reacted was the whole weight of his previous ministry. As the storm clouds together, we sense the inevitability which Luke, in any case, highlights frequently. This was how it must be. This is how God's plan of salvation must be accomplished. So, reflection today. Consider the role of tears and sorrow in Jesus' ministry. How is God's love and justice manifested in Jesus' actions and teachings? And what role does Jesus' temple action play in the larger context of his ministry and God's plan of salvation? Reflect on the inevitable course of events that leads to Jesus' arrest and crucifixion. Have a nice day, guys, and we'll see you tomorrow.